Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome back to another episode of ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. It's me, Tigria. When I was preparing for this and when I first jumped on the call with Scottie, who you are going to meet, I could have absolutely never imagined that this call would be as amazing and that this interview would be as amazing as it was. Our conversation was so rich. It took the relationship with music and salsa dancing and ayahuasca and medicine plants to a completely different level. And what I loved about talking with Scottie is that Scottie is the epitome of a multipotentialite that has found the connective thread in everything he does, from working, from being in the army, from his Christian background to his connecting the dots between his genetic heritage and his spiritual heritage, to dancing salsa and traveling into different countries in order to get to the origins of why salsa was calling to him, and then eventually becoming a plant witch. And there was so much in this conversation that I really hope you will understand that today, sometimes life might seem chaotic. It might seem like you're jumping from thing to thing to thing. And I'm sure when Scottie was probably in his early 20s, mid 20s, when he started and when he first moved 10 years ago to Colombia, he probably also thought he was jumping around from a bunch of stuff. But today, after having found what is it that really is his mission and how it fits in there and his life purpose, it all just flows together in this amazing, beautiful story, which you're going to hear in this conversation. So I just am extremely grateful for everything that he shared and for everything that you are going to be able to get out of this conversation. So please make sure that you tell me. I want to hear all your thoughts about it. But let's just then dive right into it. Welcome to Reconnect with Plant Wisdom. I'm your host, Tigria Gardenia, nature-inspired mentor, certified life coach, and the founder of the Naturally Conscious community. For over a decade, I've been known as a world ambassador for plant advocacy, working closely with plants to share their practical wisdom to help you consciously embody the elements of life that nourish your evolution. In this podcast, I delve into ancient and modern knowledge from biology to spirituality about the wondrous ways of plants. Together, we'll explore how ecosystem thinking helps you overcome limiting beliefs, understand the true nature of relationships, and live an authentic, impactful life. All right, so here we are. We are here with Scottie, and this is one of those, every once in a while you meet those people that has the meandering story, kind of like I do, and Scottie is definitely one of those people. So Scottie, I want more than anything before we get into this conversation, tell the audience, who is Scottie?
Yeah, well, I'm really honored to be here, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing. Me, in a nutshell, I was born to a very conservative Christian family living on a farm in North Carolina. So I was homeschooled my entire life. My first public school, and quote, experiences was going to the United States Military Academy at West Point. So I became a military officer, served 7 years in the Army, froze a toe and a half off in Alaska due to frostbite, almost died, nearly lost half my foot. So that was not fun. Went into the oil industry after the Army and ended up a functional alcoholic, very unhappy with my life, and started traveling around a little bit. So I ended up in Puerto Rico because one of the ways that and I've got to try not to meander too much, but one of the ways that I recovered from my frostbite injury was I became a semi-professional salsa dancer. So about 7 years into
Okay,
that,
I did not expect that.
I get that a lot. I get that so much.
I
It's like
think it's
7 years
great.
into that journey, I ended up moving to Puerto Rico because I wanted to explore the roots of salsa. And this is, interestingly enough, my sort of entry into spirituality. So when you're getting
Okay, I
into
just
really
want to side note
yeah,
that the Cuban in me is offended that you would say the roots of salsa in Puerto Rico. Okay, the Cuban here is
well,
slightly
some of the
offended.
roots, some of the roots. I know this is a huge thing. Yeah, so let me specifically say the roots of like the Taino Indians
Yeah.
and that realm. I wanted to go to Cuba. Back then they didn't have good Starlink wasn't around. They didn't have good internet. I was working online.
Hmm.
So I would have gone to Cuba, but I just couldn't make it happen. So Puerto Rico, I spent about 6 months there, and then that led me eventually to Medellin. And I mentioned that I was a functional alcoholic, very unhappy. I wasn't connected to any sort of spirituality. And Medellin just kind of grabbed me. I came here, and for the first time ever, because I think you talk about connection with the land, I felt like this was my home. And I made a life here. I've been here in Colombia, outside of Medellin, for almost 10 years now, and couldn't be happier. So I went from being a homeschooled Army officer to now I work with a lot of military veterans. I'm a plant witch. I'm taking care of the land on my own farm. I've got a farm here where I live, and I also have about 57 hectares of jungle reserve wilderness here in Colombia that I'm safeguarding. And I am very happy. I'm working with the plants in a capacity of healing as a medicine person, and I'm also a guitarist and musician. So that's
I
me in a nutshell now. And
love
yeah,
it.
like I said, couldn't be
I
happier.
love it. I love it. I love it. I love it because I totally understand how you feel about the whole, like, when you get to a place and the land just grabs you. I have very specific locations that even if I just fly over them in a
Hmm.
plane, all of a sudden my body kind of relaxes and it's like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
This it's not Italy, by the way. For all the people who are like, well, because I mean, I live in Italy because I love Damanhur, I love my community, but it was not my first choice of locations. It's not the place that my body naturally goes. Oh yeah, it's all.
Where was that
It's
place,
all
or where is that place for you?
for that place is so there's probably two biggest one is definitely Miami, and in reality it's the Caribbean in general. Like the Caribbean is for me the place where there's a few islands in the Caribbean, like St. Lucia, and of course I'm Cuban, so Cuba and such, where my body just says yes. And then there is Spain, which I feel completely connected as soon as I come near Spain. And the other place, which is it doesn't make sense until I did a big amount. I went through a few years where I was doing research into understanding kind of you could say my soul's journey. I was looking at the way my past lives were connecting and how what kind of I could get out of that journey through my past lives. And believe it or not, there's a big piece that passes through Norway of all things, which is hysterical to me because I don't like the cold. But when I was a kid, I remember kind of doing a book report type project on Norway, and I was there was something about it that kept calling to me, and then you let it go. And now I teach as part of my Medit Action. So the students that I teach here in Damanhur, a big chunk of them are Norwegians. So I have the
Hmm.
pleasure of being able to go to Norway to our ritual circle in Norway and such. And for whatever reason, which then later I figured out was connected to my Celtic roots, was connected to the way my soul had
Yeah.
journeyed from Atlantis. There's a whole other story there. It's great, but it was like, okay, now I get that. I get that. So Spain, Norway, and the Caribbean. Those are the places where
Hmm.
my body is just like, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but
Yeah, I
but we're
love
not here to
that.
talk about me. We're here to talk about you. We're here to talk about you. So you do a lot of different things in, as part of your work and as part of more, I would say, your mission, because I wouldn't say that the type of stuff you do is, I think when you were in the military, you could probably call that work. Professional salsa dancer. We're going to talk about that later too,
Semi-professional.
because huh,
Semi-professional.
semi-professional. We're going to talk
The
about that
difference is,
too.
like, do you get paid as a living for it? So I didn't get paid for it, so semi-professional.
Yeah, my so one of my closest girlfriends she's from Cali, so she's Colombian too. We love to go around here in the middle of Italy, and people look at us and they're like, "You are not Italian," and we're like, "Nope, Cuban, Colombian." Like, so people just they always their minds kind of blow for a second, like, "What are you guys doing here?" But she and I are always having this conversation because we've both taken classes of different sorts, and yet she was just telling me because she keeps taking classes, and she was like, you don't understand how much I miss just being back home and dancing, where you didn't have like
Yeah.
all the structure that people have. So, do you
Yeah.
find, totally off topic? We will get into the plants, I promise you, everyone. But I'm so curious. It's like, do you also find that now that you live in a location where, the dancing is much more organic, like we learn how to dance versus kind of the dancing that you used to do when you were semi professional and structured? Is there a
Yeah.
difference?
I I like a little bit more of the structure. It's kind of like communicating in a language,
Hmm.
right? So you have to both be more or less on the same page. You don't have to stick to the same rules exactly, but there have to be relative guidelines in place. So like here in Colombia, like it's wonderful and if you just dance in a club and everybody's kind of dancing around. The problem is like the reason why. And do you know why salsa en linea was invented in the first place? Like why people dance
No.
kind of like in a straight line? It's
No,
for
no.
space reasons, right? So you have a lot of people in a very small space.
Mhm.
And if you know as a lead, if you're like, okay, I'm moving this way and this way, or perpendicularly, if like kind of everything's across, then I can be judging all the time around me. I know how the partners are going to move around me so that neither myself nor my partner gets stepped on. And that way you can fit a
Interesting.
lot of people in a very small amount of space. So that's
Which
why
we
it was
do.
invented. Yeah. And you can still do it, but it's just like if not everybody's on the same page, it's a bit chaotic. And personally, you can definitely move your body in fun ways and kind of move your partner around. But I just find the structure so much like comforting in a way. And
Yeah.
it also, I think you can do more stuff with it, to be honest with you.
I
So
love it.
not like, yeah, not as you just don't want to go to the extreme of like the ballroom salsa. That's not what I'm
Right.
talking about,
Right, right.
right? Ballroom salsa, big X. The and on the other end of the spectrum, you've got like everybody's packed in a bar or a club, and they're doing like just the usually what is kind of like almost a circular, like a semicircular pattern that the
Right.
Colombians typically do here, or it's almost like more like a cumbia step. To be honest with you, most of the time they're actually doing more cumbia,
Yeah, I
but
believe that.
that's neither here nor there.
No, I find that fascinating because, like I said, she and I have compared notes because, I used to dance with my ex-husband many, many, many years ago, and we took classes for him, obviously because he was stepping into my culture and wanted to be able to kind of like, move around, and he didn't know anything about salsa dancing.
Gringos.
And then exactly, oh, gringos, beautiful, beautiful gringos. And it was great, but of course it has that rigidity, that structure, and until he could get used to it and go. And so she and I are always comparing notes about this because she here, in order to be able to dance, has come into the school culture, and she's like, there are moments like you just said that the structure is nice because then you can interact. She's like, but I just miss being immersed in a grouping of people where everybody just kind of organically knows things, because or like how I grew up and I learned how to dance, which was my mother and I putting Willie Chirino on and Celia Cruz on
Mhm.
in the on the stereo in the house and just dancing around the entire house. She's like, sometimes I
Bazooka.
just miss that. Exactly. You got to love her. You got to love it. So it was a great
She's a
time. Okay,
queen.
there's our side talk on this because because it fascinates me and I love the relationship. And I do love actually the Taino. I'm glad that you did bring up the Taino people because I've had the beauty of having so we have an entire and we spoke about this when before the we started recording, where I had talked to you about the fact of us working with shamans around the world. And the Taino people is actually one of those really interesting stories about here in Damanhur, how shamans are arriving with knowledge that they're sharing with us, and that they're asking us to help safeguard for them in an energetic way. And I had a woman who randomly came to Damanhur. She was staying in my nucleo, and she had come for like a work exchange, and she had been in Puerto Rico before coming to Damanhur. And she's American, and she's also in the dance community. She's like in an intentional dance community. And she was there, and she had told people she was on her way to Damanhur when one of the elders, one of the last elders in the area that she was in, grabbed her and said, I need you to do something for me. By the way, at this point, we had not announced to the world publicly that we were doing this call for shamans. It was still very much something we were doing across
Mhm.
the synchronic lines and energetically. And so one day she's talking to me and she's telling me, hey, by the way, I have something I need to give somebody. Can I give it to you? And I'm like, well, what is it? She's like, well, one of the elders kind of pulled me aside and gave me an artifact that I need to give to you. She's like, I need to give it to somebody here in Damanhur, and there's a very specific way I need to give it to you. It's like there's a ritual passing of it. And I looked at her and I'm like, I
Mhm.
am not the person that you're supposed to give this to, but let me get that person for you. And it was quite
Nice.
amazing because she had been given this kind of it's a plate that apparently is some kind of pendant, and it had been wrapped in black, and it had been given to her by this elder, and they had explained to her, you need to do these motions and this is how you hand it off and such. And I was blown away because again, we hadn't been talking about this, and it was like this connection that was passing. So it was my first foray into the relationship
Mm.
with the shamans, the what eventually became this mission of ours of safeguarding in the crystal spiral, and there's an entire kind of whole other piece to it. So I'm hoping that one day you're going to come with some of
I would
your,
very much like
you
that.
know, with some of the elders from where you are, and we could do this together, which then segues me into, I would love for you to share, because we had such a fascinating conversation of your relationship with the land in which you're in is very particular. It's comes from an organic relationship that you've developed, like from that love and that
Mhm.
feeling that you had. And I'd love for you to take the audience a little bit through how did that develop for you? How did you go from being, the army warrior to that plant witch that you
Mhm.
are now?
Yeah, that's there's a lot of different threads that I'll try to weave in, and I hope that I can get to all of them, because it's a really fascinating and very personal story that I don't tell to everybody, because you probably encountered this. There's so much of a negative stereotype against people that work with plants or witches, that when you say, "Yeah, I'm a witch," you instantly get this like cringy reaction. It's quite awful. So part of what I'm doing is trying to, I think, as witches, we need to reframe people's understanding of who that is. My view is that it was typically the medicine women, the women that were trying to help people, that were trying to make tinctures and prevent people from, kids from dying in childbirth. Those were the ones that were burnt at the stake. So
Right.
thanks to that entire legacy, we got the cringy reaction today. So as I started to do my own healing process, I started to getting into spirituality. Brief side note, not to talk too much about salsa, but salsa was my entry into spirituality. So as I started to dig into the roots of it, there are movements that originated in salsa either from the Indians or the Native Americans or the Indigenous worship, like how they would worship their gods, and then it mixed with the African spirituality. So there's this particular, I remember it like it was yesterday. There's a particular move in salsa where you're moving side to side, and you're like cutting wheat and praying to God. And I was doing that, and I got chills like running up and down my body in the middle of a song, and I had a vision of I was praying to something or someone, and I had no idea what that was. At this point, I wasn't praying, I wasn't religious, and that started this whole process of like, okay, what is this? Is this like an energy? Is this like a spirit? Is this a god? That like I don't know what that is. So that was my entry road into it. So as I got further into the realm of spirituality, I started connecting with the land. I had this insane desire to grow things. So like I started filling my entire apartment. I lived in a small apartment in Medellin at the time. Apartment, balcony, walls. I put in like all these little racks that I could put more plants in. I filled my entire place with plants. And then I went for a little journey. I was traveling actually with my Yorkie Terrier for 8 months. This is Chewy.
Hi, Chewy. For those who are listening, too bad because you have to see
Yeah, you're
Chewy.
missing
Chewy is
out.
adorable, and Chewy's been sitting on his lap the entire time.
He sits on my lap all day. It's pretty impressive. And so I was in Arizona. I'd ridden my motorcycle through most of Central America, come up into the States, and I was visiting a woman that I was dating at the time. And we were just kind of, I don't know, I felt like some bad energy. And so I was putting some Palo Santo in the apartment or something. And I step into the bathroom, and I immediately had like a vision. Everything turned black, and I was in the middle of the Amazon jungle, and there was a indigenous woman that was looking at me, that was holding a plant mixture of some sort, and she was just staring at me. And I instantly felt like this is me, but from another life. And then at that same moment, my girlfriend came in, and she said, "You're a witch." I was like, "What?" Like, this is news to me. This is some homeschooled kid, like very very Christian. Like we couldn't as a kid, I couldn't watch Star Wars because my parents felt that was like magical. It was demonic, the Force. So that's where I was coming from. And so that kind of started this whole process of exploration. There is a Native American chief, I think it's Whitetail. He said, "Look, come here and learn our traditions, learn our ways, but make peace with your own ancestors first." So I did two things. I started investigating, well, what is a plant witch and how do I become a better one? And that led me to the development of this relationship with those spirits. And also, I'm Irish and German. And so I started to, and actually joined the Celtic order. So I'm officially a druid, level 1, the keeper
Woohoo.
of the wisdom of the trees. And so I've got like the plants on this side, and then learning about the trees now to communicate with them on this side. And that's what led me into that connection with the land. And now, present day, I'm working with a lot of psychedelic medicines and developing the relationship with them in a similar way. Like just how you sit down and you talk to like a basil plant, you talk to, in our view, the ayahuasca plant or the tobacco plant or the coca plant. And part of good stewardship and guardianship is I'm growing all of these plants myself. So it's not just something I go to a ceremony and I take them. I'm growing and talking to all these plants on the daily. And it's completely changed my life.
See, you and I do have very similar paths because that's what I was telling you about, similar to myself, which is when I started to do research into why I was in this land, why, like I said, Italy wouldn't be my choice mentally or even energetically, but Dominher is home. And I was trying to figure out why this, I mean, I'm in the middle of the mountains myself, right? I'm in the Val Chiusella Valley. We're in Piedmont. It's beautiful, but it's like, why am I here? I'm a city girl, as my mother loves to remind
Mhm.
remind me over and over again. And it was the same thing. It was like going into the lineage of my family, but then passing through, you know, I remember when I was living in Spain, I fell upon this book. And in this book, it was explaining the Celtic world. In other words, how the Celts and the Druidic line had passed through and where it had passed through in Spain. And it was the first time I remember this. It was like the early 2000s. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my goodness, that is why I feel it's not just because, sure,
That's the
four
Spain connection.
generations back, it's the Spain. That's the Spain
Yeah.
connection. And I remember feeling it so strongly that, that's why I was in, that area, why I was doing this. And then learning here where we are, which is Damanhur is connected to a satellite or we don't like to use the word colony, so we've been using satellite of Atlantis, and how the Atlantis had this strong arm that came out into Egypt that was like the part of it that was very cathedral based, ornate based, the idea of everything being opulent and of the gods and the goddesses and all these other pieces, which doesn't really call to me. But there was another part. There's a part of the mythology that is that there was also a satellite that went up into the Nordic countries, and this is the part of the that was more of the trees, the forest, the land, the fact that the divine is found in these natural spaces, and that the cathedrals that where the Egyptians would build them with stone and with gold and all these other types of things in the Nordic cultures were built, they weren't built, they were found, they were discovered, they were in the outside forested areas. If they had to be built, they were wood. I mean, there's this, even in Finland, there's this gorgeous ancient, one of the biggest, I think, and longest and oldest, excuse me, fully wooden cathedrals that still
Oh,
exists.
wow.
It's and walking into it is this thing you can. It's a completely different energy from something built out of stone, and that was helping me understand and put together, the fact that I'm very connected to an Irish divinity and all of this, but
Mhm.
more than anything, helping me understand how all these different pieces were coming together and where, the water comes in. It's always to me so amazing that when we start doing these types of journeys into our past, our present becomes so much richer because it's almost like you now
Oh, yeah.
know why you ended up in the place that you're in.
Yeah,
How do
that
you feel? Oh, sorry, I
oh, no,
interrupted you.
no. Well, I just wanted to kind of add, like, I really, really resonate with that. And I think my exploration with the medicine has shown me this. I don't know if this resonates. I'm not saying this is truth, but this is what I feel. I feel we have two different lineages. We have a genetic lineage and we have a spiritual lineage.
Mhm.
And so it's not a contradiction for me to say, like, I am Druidic in lineage, but I'm also Amazonian.
Right.
Like those two things are like, I don't know. I don't honestly know how that logically works, but it does. That's- yeah. And then there was
Yeah,
something else
and
I wanted to add, but I forgot it.
well, I completely agree, and from a Damanhuri perspective, it even makes sense because we have the journey our soul has taken, like you said, our spiritual lineage, and this is the journey that connects in different
Yes.
aspects of, these are those past lives and those other parts that could be in very different locations, but have followed a similar thread, right, through different periods of time. And then we have the lineage that comes through our maternals and our fraternal lines that are like all of these paternal lines, not fraternal, paternal lines that are really those parts of ourselves that are connected to the physical
Yeah,
body and to the
fraternal
incarnation.
paternal lines would get a little tricky.
Yeah, exactly. Don't like that.
Yeah, I think that,
But
like, as you mentioned, like the spiritual genetics is almost like the soul identity. So the soul
mhm,
is, it doesn't matter if
exactly.
you're an Amazonian plant witch or a Celt, it doesn't matter. And then every one of these bodies that we step into, I feel like we get a genetic lineage for each one of those lines. So the genetic lineage, I think, might be most important for the current life. The
Correct.
soul is most important for all of them.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I love the fact that I think for you, which is anybody who listens to the podcast a lot knows that I don't shy away from it, but I don't necessarily get into the whole psychedelic culture because in my experience it is another okay, let me just caveat this by saying that I'm talking about in a very generic form, but in a very generic
You're
form.
not gonna offend me. Just
Yeah,
say it. Let's roll.
I also want to make sure I also don't offend anybody who's listening, which is, for many people they take the medicine, and I am
Yeah.
not stating that you don't have a relationship in some ways, but there is very different when we were speaking. What I loved about the way that you were talking about it's almost like that genetic, like you said, and that spiritual connection allowed you to not allowed you is what opens you or predisposes you to the desire to have a different type of relationship with these plants, a relationship that is, yes, there is ingestion, but there's also literally relationship. I want to be
Yes.
a steward, but I also want to be your student, but I also want to be your partner because we're growing and we're co-creating together. And I'd love to hear more
Yeah.
about how has it been different in your experience of working with these plants by being in such close proximity and literally, co-creating in a growth process with these plants as well.
Yeah, I'd add maybe one more word to that description. There are a lot more that you could add. And servant, like I'm
Yeah.
a servant of these plants. And I just got chills when I said that. You're welcome. Yeah, thank you. So it's very like when you think about how people typically use plants, we're very unfortunately influenced by the Western culture. I'm not saying Western medicine is bad. My wife is a doctor, a medical doctor, for example. So there's a balance, and Western medicine is good for a lot of things, but it is focused on, above all else, the use of drugs to treat symptoms and not root problems. And
Mhm.
so Americans have a headache. Oh, I'm going to take an Advil. The indigenous are going to be like, have you tried drinking water first? So like, what's the root of the problem? And don't go immediately to treating the symptoms. And so when a lot of people that aren't familiar with these carefully safeguarded practices, they think of something like yahe or mushrooms like a drug. And so this is one of the reasons why like people are like, hey, should I microdose? I'm like, I in general don't recommend that because it's the idea of like, oh, I'm just taking a plant as a drug, and you're not, in most cases, not all cases, but not most cases, you're not developing a relationship with that plant. So when you go down to the indigenous, and let's just talk about yahe or ayahuasca, for example. So yahe is what we call ayahuasca in the Colombian region. The elders will tell you that the ceremony is not when you take the medicine. The ceremony is the life afterwards, because the work with the medicine is what you do after. It's not healing you, it is bringing you to the point where you can heal yourself. And that requires a relationship with the plant. So you sit down and you're not like sitting back and like, okay, take me, whatever I will, whatever. You're working with it. And ayahuasca can be very, I hesitate to say brutal, but it can be very rough. It can be a very challenging process. And the relationship can be seen very clearly in terms of if you're taking medicine a lot, if you're taking ayahuasca a lot, and it's telling you to change things in your life, and you're not changing things in your life, it gets angry with you. And it will start to shake you a little bit and poke you a little bit. And if you don't listen to it, it will clobber you over the head. I've seen this happen so many times. It's happened with me a lot, and I've learned my lesson. And it's like when we're talking about this, oh, you have to learn your lesson with the medicine. You have to listen to what it says. If that isn't a relationship, I don't know what is. Like this, we believe this is an entity, a spirit. And so when I take the medicine, I do it with a little bit of fear, to be honest with you, like a tremendous amount of humble respect. Like, thank you for allowing me this connection with you. And it's not the only type of connection we have. Ceremonies are wonderful and it's a very powerful connection, but it also requires that you have connection with it in other areas of your life. How are you honoring that plant in your life? Are you communicating to it? Are you talking to its energy when you're not in ceremony? Are you cultivating it? Are you encouraging and supporting the people that are cultivating it? Because one thing that also in the world, we're sort of a little bit running out of ayahuasca. Don't go to your pharmacy and buy some more. But the problem is, it's becoming so popular that it takes a long time to grow, and there are a lot of thirsty people out there. And
Mhm.
so that's also becoming a challenge. So like there's a lot of things that we need to consider, I believe, when we're involved in this plant, about its safeguarding and making sure that it flourishes in the world. So when I said servant, part of what we're doing, and I'm going to step off my soapbox in like 30 seconds, I promise. Part of
You
what we're
can
doing,
stay on the soapbox. It's a great soapbox for you to be on.
oh, thank you. I'm very honored. We're servants of this plant in the sense that we are helping it move out of the Amazon. It is decided, and the general consensus among the Taitas and elders is the same, that it is time for the plant to leave the Amazon. During the conquistadors and the invasions, the plants were safeguarded, and their ceremonies and cosmovisions were carefully stewarded and sort of insular. And now they are starting to, thankfully, come out of the jungle and come to serve to other peoples, because I think that's very needed and very necessary. So I feel myself as a servant of the plant, who is responsible for not only making sure it's taken care of at home, but also making sure that it's responsibly and safely used in other places. And so I'm going to the US actually this year with a wonderful medicine friend of mine, and we are going to be helping educate the US people, and eventually I think Italy as well, on how to use that plant respectfully. And it's very interesting. It's very interesting. It's very different, and a lot of stuff to say there. But I'll pause.
I actually have a strange question as to, in your experience, do you find that let me preface this by I'll give one story, which is not the story I was going to give, but it's the one that's coming to me right now that feels like it's most poignant. I have somebody who lives here in Dominiher, and many years ago, he's Icelandic. So when he first moved here, we would have these long conversations, and he was telling me about his journey, about all the different parts of Icelandic culture that brought him to the spirituality that was coming to Dominiher. And at the
Mhm.
time, he had discovered the music of the plants, and he was working with the music of the plants. And he was working on a personal. He was in a personal quest type journey with a specific issue, a specific medical issue that he was working with. And he had come from, way before, at the very beginning of his journey, to kind of like ingesting in its own way marijuana, like cannabis.
Mhm.
And then with the music of the plants, he had switched organically. This was even before he became a Dominarian, to switch organically to listening to the music of cannabis and finding that for him, the medicine was much
Was
more
it just playing
potent.
like Grateful Dead, or
No, the music of the plants device is the device that I
I
was
know
telling you
I'm
about
kidding.
earlier, which is I mean, I think some of the people with the Grateful Dead kind of with the Grateful Dead, you sort of inherently got this. So most definitely, but I think that's a different angle of cannabis, just a slightly different part of the overall archetype. In this case, he really ended up healing because he started to listen to the music in a therapeutic way,
Hmm.
and then was able to, like you said, go through the different layers, find the core cause, move through it. But he discovered that for him, the smoking part of it, in this case, um, went away. It wasn't the way that he was supposed to continue to work with this plant. And he moved into the music, and then eventually into a relationship of plant communication, and then, working with the music and communicating with the plant in different ways. Do you find that there are non ingesting ways that you have found, either for yourself or for the people around you, that
Hmm.
there are people that it's like, no, ingestion is not part of my path, that I've realized that there
Yeah,
are lots of different ways to connect and work with this plant?
yeah, no, 100%. I mean, you talked about the music. Music is a fantastic way to do this. And so I'm a musician and I play in ceremony. And it helps if you ingest the plant, but it's not necessary, because by connecting with the plant, you can understand that it likes certain rhythms, it likes certain songs. It like you can play the same song and you'll have to play it differently if you're in a mushroom ceremony versus a ayahuasca ceremony versus a wachuma ceremony, etc. And so like I often kind of say, like, you have to learn how to play guitar, and then you have to learn how to play guitar in accordance with the energy of each specific plant. And the plant will teach you. whether you're taking it or not. One of the first major evolutions I made as a medicine musician, I was out in the middle of the jungle, a couple hours away from the nearest town, with one of my taitas, and it was me, the taita's wife, and a candle. We had no electricity, no running water, and I just had my guitar. And the taita didn't play. He shook his rattle, but he didn't play any music. And I sat down and I was like, well, this is going to be a kind of a boring ceremony otherwise. And the plant said, hey, no, I'm going to teach you. And I started playing, and it taught me how to play. I was like, this is wild. So that's one way to do it.
Yeah, and you've taken this even to another level, right? Because to a certain extent, your musicianship is now a big part of also your way of being in service and of giving back to this community, and of also of to a certain extent being a servant is been with the music, because you have a massive music part program, right? Especially for children.
Yeah, so we focus on all ages. This is so key to my identity and mission, and so close to my heart that I'm very excited to be able to talk about this. This is also tied in with the idea of spreading the plants, because as musicians, we're not really playing songs. We're playing prayers. We're playing energies. We're bringing in spirits, and those spirits are inexorably connected
We're
to
echoing the
the
rhythm
plants that
of
we're
the
working
actual
with.
land.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so there's like this wonderful land of Colombia has two musical elements, well, many, but two in particular that I'm focused on. So one, there are Andean musical elements because in Colombia we have the three cordilleras, the three, basically the Andes at the tip splits out into three separate mountain chains that run through Colombia until they meet the sea, which is also another fantastic place. Actually, I have a Mamu from the Wiwa community, and four of his children staying in my community now. So it's like I'm getting a lot of different influences. Anyway, so you got the Andean musical instruments, the charango, the different rhythms on the guitar. Then you got that mixing with the jungle, so the Putumayo region of the Amazon
Right.
basin, and then you've got those connected with the plants. So what I'm doing, one of my missions is to spread visibility about these musical elements, and through that mechanism, visibility and the spirit and the energy of the plants. So that's kind of point one. Point two is this is a foundation that's dedicated to serving our local musicians, because as musicians we can't be worrying about the rent. We need to be able to go to the river and just play on a rock, and let's go do that for a couple days. And so I'm solving a couple problems at once. I had a friend of mine that came to me and said, "Scottie, like I really want to learn how to play guitar, but I don't want to pay. I don't want to buy a course. I don't have money. I don't even have a guitar. Can you help me?" And so I started this project because the plants told me to. And so we've got like 12 different local instructors. We're getting more. The whole thing is free. There's nothing you can buy, like period. It is purely to get the message of the plants and the music out. And so we've got a bunch of different introductory, intermediate, and advanced courses. And our goal is to become the Wikipedia of medicine music. So if you want to connect with the energy of any one of these plants, come learn the songs and sing to the plants, and they will come to you because they're energetically connected. Like when we go into an inipi, which is a sweat lodge in the Native American traditions, like typically Lakota, um, when we're calling in those songs, those energies come. And so we have to be very careful. Like, hey, if we're not in Temescal or not in Inipi, we have to say, look, just FYI, I'm practicing this song. So you can come if you want to, but don't be surprised if there's not an Inipi here. And the same thing can happen. So you can learn these songs and call in those energies and start to work with them as long as you're respectful and just let them know if they're not in a ceremony.
And this might be the perfect segue for us to take a quick pause to share one of my ego conscious business partners. For over a decade, I've had the profound joy of working with the music of the plants, a musical instrument made just for plants. This very music is what sparked my own plant reawakening, guiding me to reconnect with nature in an entirely new way. Imagine listening to the harmonious melodies of your plant companions and feeling their wisdom and presence through the language of music. It's an experience that has transformed my life and the lives of so many other people. If you're curious about the hidden songs of plants and want to connect to your plant friends in a completely new way, I invite you to discover more at tigriadagenia.com/music of the plants. It's in the show notes. Plant music is great for healing, sharing, and personal connection. Let's continue our journey of personal evolution and plant consciousness together. with the songs of plants. I love that you said that. I think that's such an important aspect of it, especially because, you know, the music is how do I explain? How do I say it? I now lost the words in the sense of it's one of those concepts where you feel it in your body and it's really hard to put words around it, which is that
Yeah, I feel you.
yeah, right. You know that this music is more it's an expression, but it's also a frequency. I remember when I was the first time I ever recognized that with the music of the plants I could hear the music of that land was when I was in Australia, because obviously Australia having very unique flora, unique fauna, unique, relationship with the land. I took and I connected my music of the plants, and I remember hearing these notes of music that were almost like didgeridoos, like they would come in these
Mhm.
long, drawn out sounds that you wouldn't hear in other locations. And I was listening with a group of musicians and a group of people that were very close to the land. We were doing song lines. I don't know if you've ever worked with song lines before, but song lines are amazing. I was working with a professor of the university there who is he works with Indigenous song lines, and song lines were the music that was used before there were ever maps by the Indigenous people. They were those small, short phrases and rhythms that would help you get from place to place. And so you would do things like, you were walking by an area that had a riverbank and there was a specific kind of animal. So you might, the song line might be something like, the kiwi drinks from the ocean, from the water, the kiwi standing up strong, it's
Or
little things like
we
that.
don't
And
go over that bin because the python eats us.
exactly, and it has like all these little phrases in it. And we were doing he teaches modern songlines, and so we were in this beautiful eco park in the middle of Melbourne, and we were creating modern day songlines. Somebody had, by the way, just as a little side, they had the best line ever because it was more like the silicone jumping down the path and something something connected to it. And it was because it was, lots of joggers, and there were the women with the fake breasts, and it was just so
Nice.
funny. But the point being was like, and I was listening to, so we were all people at the time, we were doing this entire kind of weekend workshop which was connected to music of the plants and the relationship with the land and the song lines, and we were building out song lines, so we were listening to a lot of music connected to the different plants of the area. And all of a sudden it was like crystal clear. I was like, this is why it sounds different from when I'm in Italy or versus when I'm somewhere else. Like, this is and it explains why a musicologist many years ago who was working with a good friend of mine had my friend had sent him music without telling him what the music was from. He had sent him this like recording that had come that was a music of the plants, but he didn't say anything. He's just like, can
Mhm.
you tell me anything about this music? Because I just got hold of this music. And the professor was like, where did you get this? And he's like, why? And he's like, because it sounds like 300-year-old, Baroque music from this particular region of Italy. He's like, it's from a 300-year-old tree from that region of Italy. And it was like, oh my goodness,
Wow.
this is an amazing way of connecting. And I love it when humans allow themselves to connect so deeply with the land, with the beings of the land, with the plants of the land, that you create that yourself. And I think that that's the medicine music that you're talking about. It's
100%.
a full expression of, I am a being of nature in this location, because like you said, to you, your
Yes.
body resonates with this place. This is me. This is who I am supposed to be today. This is where I am supposed to be. And the culmination of everything that I have been spiritually and physically is what allows me to plug in to
Yeah.
the deep resonance that's happening in this space. And this music that is being created, what turns that music from pop music into medicine music is not that it gets used in ceremony, like you said. It is that connection. It's that
Correct.
pipeline that then
Yeah.
allows it to come through.
And it goes even deeper. I'm not talking like, and I love Danit, but I'm not talking about like Danit. I'm talking about within there are many different types of ayahuasca, and every different tribe has their own special way of connecting and their own special way of expressing that through the music that is like the marker for that particular tribe and their particular thousands of years old. So for example, the Siona, dame la fortaleza para avanzar, dame la fortaleza. Okay, that's Siona. Then if I hear a song like say Taita Henry Muchi Savoy of the Inga, Bum dun 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 dun. Bum 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 bum. Ah, that's Inga. And it's like I know exactly. I can run right into that connection with that particular plant from that particular tribe by learning their music.
I
And
love that.
like that's mind blowing. I can't even explain how awesome that is.
Yeah, because that is it. That's that place. I mean, for you, that's the way that you recognize and feel and plug into that connection. And isn't it what we're all looking for, right? In our own
Yes,
ways, we are all trying to reconnect back into what pushes us into our natural roots, right? For me, it's the plantness. It's the sitting, the deep presence, the deep resonance that allows me to recognize parts of myself that I had been closed off from, and that the
yes,
plants help kind of bring out in me and say, no, no, the full essence of you is all of this other stuff that you, for you, your door of access is sit with us, listen to, in my case, the music of the plants, listen to us also by just being. And that's where you're going to get it. And for you, that doorway is that music that allows you to kind of like, almost like if you think about that the earth is the amp and you're just plugging in with your guitar, and and
exactly.
able to then have that resonance and that relationship that comes out of it. I love that. I think it's so important, and it's such a way of us. And again, I hate to say this, but because I really do hope that the people who listen will recognize that being in relationship with these types of master plants is much more than I go to a ceremony on a weekend and I drink. And
Yes,
it is much more of everything that I am beforehand in order to be able to open myself into this, and then everything, like you said, that happens afterwards that allows me to take whatever came through, even if by that drinking, but and then let it become a part of me and let it forge new relationships that I never thought were actually possible.
exactly. Yeah. And
and,
as we
and
like to say, as you develop that relationship, you need less and less medicine, and eventually no medicine taken in ceremony to connect with it. So it's like
right.
this sort of like anti-tolerance.
Right, right. And honestly, from a magical perspective, from a spiritual, from a witchy perspective, it is what every, generation has always talked about, which is all of these tools that we use, right? Drinking, all of these external tools, whether we're talking about, like you said, instruments, musical instruments, whether we're talking about the music of the plants, they are all access points to things that we have inside, which at some point they're no longer necessary. We can choose to use them as augments, but the problem is they're necessary for many people because of that disconnection. But once that connection completely becomes embodied in you, it becomes more of a beautiful enhancement, like an accessory or
But not
something that
necessary.
but not necessary, because all of that music, that mind-blowing connection, the sensations, the all of those senses and everything comes online in something that you can trigger from just I take a moment, I enter into the present. I go into my inner animalness and my plantness, and I find that point of my complete essence, and everything comes online. And then I choose to channel it however I want. I might grab a guitar and do it. I might end up, having a beautiful speech. I might end up,
Mhm.
gardening, but it's all an expression of it. And I love when I hear people who have done the journey to get there, because it is a journey, right? It's not
Yeah.
something that just happens overnight.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. And that's me opening this connection with the plants has led to a lot of other really fantastic things that are happening. So one of the courses we're actually adding to the the Coyotepe Escuela is 2 nights ago, a dear friend of mine, his partner came over, and she is one of the most wonderful vocalists that I know about. And then she brought a friend of hers, and they sat down with me and they said, "We want to create a course for women to unblock the voice in the feminine way and connect that with the power of their uterus and their moon." And I was like,
Yep.
yes, let's
Sign me up.
go. So I'm in, man. I'm in. So it's like there are so many things that are flourishing here because just like a plant, you grow it, you starts off as a seedling, and then it starts to germinate, pollinate, and it starts to flourish. And I'm so very happy to be safeguarding and to be helping that process along.
And I want to add one piece that you have kind of subtly said, but if it's okay with you, I want to highlight, which is
Mhm.
this really is all a journey, especially because I
Yeah.
think people who listen to sometimes, especially when we're talking about medicine, think about it's kind of like this instant illumination, like all of a sudden I'm enlightened in 10 seconds of me taking a drink, or yes, I have this amazing opening and experience. And then at the end of the ceremony, but if you want to bring that experience home with you, if you want to bring it into something that becomes part of your real true life, it's a journey. I mean, for you,
Yes.
you've been 10 years in Medellin, but you started before that when you went to Puerto Rico, when you
Mhm.
started on your whole like other part of your journey once you left the army, and you've been traveling this in a conscious way to a certain extent, like looking for consciousness, looking to connect in that in such
Yeah.
a long period. And I think that that's another element that the plants make easier for us to kind of I don't know how to express it either, but it's something that I have noticed that it becomes easier to recognize this as a long-term journey when
Yes.
you're working with the plants. It's almost as if just the same as kin grow slowly, their bodies express and move and slightly shift. And if you really spend a lot of time with a plant, you will see those shifts every day. You will see the slight minute shifts. But it's something that you've had to work to see those minute shifts. The same as yourself. We it doesn't happen overnight. It's not that we don't want you to have this at 20 years of age. Of course we would love it, but it is a journey and it takes time and it takes being in it, not hiding from it, but allowing yourself to like sink into those rhythms, sink into everything that it takes. It's showing all those different sides of yourself and healing yourself from pieces and awakening other pieces. And I feel like that's something that you are showing by these different elements of your journey that have all come together to where you are today.
Yeah, I guess I'm very glad that you mentioned that. Sometimes it might feel like you're instantly enlightened. Disregard that. Uh, just the more you learn, the wiser you become, the slower you move, and the more humble you get.
Oh, I
And
love
so,
that.
just like a plant, you've got to move slowly. Like, do not be the person that takes ayahuasca 3 times and decides to go down to Peru and get a 10-day certification to serve ayahuasca. Please don't be that person.
I'm glad that's coming from you and not from me, but I agree with you.
Yeah, be humble.
Yes.
Go talk to some indigenous. Ask them how to train. They're gonna think about it for 6 months, and if they take you on board, they're gonna work with you for many, many, many years, and they will let you
Yes.
know not when you're ready and not the other way around. It's not gonna be over 10 days
Yes.
of certification.
I love that. And I'm so glad that you said that because I do think it's important. And again, this goes to anything, right? As we were talking about mastery and the shedding of the tools. You can only teach the tools, in my opinion, or really teach them when you have mastered them so much that you've been able to shed them. Because then you can take people through that journey and it becomes a conscious choice when you use them and it makes it easier for you to try to, and it's never easy because teaching is never easy, but it's more of okay, and it's not really ever teaching, isn't it? It's like let me point you in a direction where you can have experiences that allow the knowledge to come into you. Like let me
Exactly.
just
Well, it's the same
point
thing
you
as
in.
healing. Nobody's healing you. You're learning how to heal yourself. You're learning how to teach
Exactly.
yourself.
Exactly. Scottie, this has been even better than I thought it was going to be. I am extremely grateful for everything that you've said. So I want you to state, I mean, we're going to include it all in the show notes, but I want you to tell people clearly, like, where do they find your school, your online?
Mhm.
Is it just for certain facets of people, or is this for anybody that wants to connect to this type of medicine music? Just
Yeah.
give yourself ample space right now to tell people about this because it is an important mission and I'm really happy to be able to share it with everyone.
I'm very honored. It is for absolutely everyone. We are growing very rapidly. We launched a little less than 2 months ago. We've got 4,300 people already as students. We are launching courses for feminine unlocking the voice. We have got full courses on guitar. We're adding sonaja. We're adding percussion. We're adding charango. We are adding energetic connection in singing. We're adding everything. Like we have just raised the standard and said, hey, come on, come teach us. And so we're going to be expanding that later on to different cosmovisions. So going to the Indigenous and say, hey, tell me about your language. Tell me about the songs and the specific way that you connect with the plants. Tell me how that we can learn this. So we are going full steam. And the more people that we get on board, the more places that share, the quicker we can grow. And we're very grateful for anyone that wants to come join and learn and support us. So that said, it's in Spanish. We are translating it into English. So we'll have the audio in Spanish in the native language, and then audio translations in English and subtitles. So escuela.coyotipi.com. It's probably best if they go to the show notes and see that.
Exactly.
That'll be difficult to spell out.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been such a great conversation. And for everybody who's listening, remember that if you've ever felt called to work with plants in this way before, if you want to explore these types of topic, just reach out, right? The path of this type of path of moving forward is not something that we've ever done alone. All of us have all found our communities and our relationships and our own ecosystems that we go in and out of. And that's an extremely important perspective in this. And so if you really want to have a place where we can talk about these types of conversations and we can work and co-create with the plants, know that the Naturally Conscious community is there for you. This is a space where people like you who are looking for this level of connection with plants can come to connect, to understand, and to thrive alongside so many others that are exploring the world this way. And of course, if this episode resonated with you, remember to like, to comment, to subscribe, to go visit Scottie's work, because by sharing all of these different ideas, you're helping to create a world where those of us who think differently and who are looking to really reconnect back with our own roots don't have to do it alone. So thank you so much for being here. We're all in this together, and we're learning from nature, with nature, as being of nature, so that we can create the world that we all want to live in. By the way, also, if you're craving some deeper support for yourself, or if you want to learn how to create your own ecosystem or explore these concepts personally, remember that I'm always here and I'd love to work with you. As a life coach, I help alternative thinkers and people who are looking for strong, deep connections to co-create their lives, to really break free from any kind of limiting expectations and to find their own personal direction for natural growth. So again, all of the information is in the show notes for you to set up a discovery call with me, and let's talk about how to make this all happen. But that's it for this episode. Please remember to resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. That's it from us. We're out. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. To continue these conversations, join us in the Naturally Conscious community, your premier online ecosystem for plant reawakening and accelerated evolution and co-creation with other kin. Here, you'll find expansive discussions, interactive courses, live events, and supportive group programs like the Plant Wisdom Book Club and the Sprouts Writing and Creativity Group. Connect with like-minded individuals collaborating with plants to integrate these insights into life. Intro and outro music by Steve Shuley and Poinsettia from The Singing Life of Plants. That's it for me, Tigria Gardenia, and my plant collaborators. Until next time, remember, resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. I'm out. Bye.